Hi, everyone, and welcome to Healing the Workplace, a collaboration between Heal Magazine and LAUDACE. I'm Selma.
And I'm Axelle. We're so excited to have you with us as we explore the future of mental health in the workplace from a people-first, social justice-driven lens.
Yes, this is not just another workplace well-being podcast. It's about reclaiming space, about talking about what it really takes to feel like you belong at work, to show up authentically, and to stay well while doing it. To kick things off, we thought we'd start by sharing a little bit about why we created this podcast in the first place.
To make it simple, this series was born out of frustration, but also hope. Frustration with how much masking, shrinking, and surviving we see around us, and hope that we can shift the current corporate culture and status quo to one where people are allowed to flourish at work.
I think in our work, we both see so many opportunities for businesses to create spaces where people can thrive. But often the opposite happens. High potential, creative, driven people feel stuck or invisible due to lack of psychological safety and inclusion.
And that's why this podcast exists, to bring humanity back into conversations about work. We want to center real people, not just policies or productivity metrics.
So let's bring that closer to home, because this is not just a theory for us. We've lived it. So let's dive into our personal experiences navigating belonging, identity, and mental health at work. Axelle, let's talk a little bit about our personal experiences. How has your experience been, when it comes to being your full self at work?
Well, let me just say that I learned the hard way that bringing your full self to work isn't that easy, and it's not safe for someone who looks like me. And from the very beginning, when I started my career, I thought that, well, these different workplaces I stepped foot in told me that I could be myself. I could be open about things. I could be transparent about things. But then later on, I realized that this was often lip service, or it hit a bit like culture, where this wasn't actually the basis or what was welcomed. You could be yourself to a certain extent. You could be yourself only to the point where it didn't disturb the status quo and like what was being done, or the type of people who could speak up, or the ways in which you could speak up. And then as I got more into my career, I also then got to the conclusion that it was not just the fact that I was bringing myself to work and speaking up and being myself. It was the fact that it was also about who I was, right? In most of my teams, I was the youngest by many years, and then like the gap reduced a bit as I got further into my career. But then I realized that there was also the intersection of my age with my gender, and then also my race. And then later on, I found out that I was neurodivergent. But by the time I found out I was neurodivergent, I was already burnt out and had gone through everything you can think of, from, the bullying and the like marginalization and like exclusion in the workplace. I had gone through workplace trauma for being who I was, for standing up for myself, standing up for others in the workplace, for trying to change the workplace to become better, to become safer, to become more psychologically safe for people like me, but also just for anyone who works, right? I wanted people to be able to be comfortable at work. I wanted things to be fair at work, and I never understood why I would see my colleagues or myself suffering, and then people wouldn't want to do anything about it. And yeah, so the other thing as well that was particular was how all these experiences of exclusion and trauma and marginalization slowly drove me from my customer facing roles and corporate sales roles I was at the beginning of my career to doing increasingly more social impact driven work. It first started a bit as like, let me lend my voice or my experience to inspire people in the workplace to do differently. And then I then went to study corporate communications because I was so fascinated about why corporations failed so much at implementing change and why they did very little to address change resistance, especially when it came to advocating for the well-being of people, the inclusion of people. And yeah, I found myself like catapulted into doing advocacy work for my previous employer. Yeah, little do you know, burnt out from doing too much advocacy work while being bullied, and having a very terrible managerial experience. And yeah, and then all these experiences led me to start my business. And I would say that me even starting my business is a direct result of not feeling safe in the workplace, and entrepreneurial spaces became a bit of like a safe haven where I could rediscover my purpose, rediscover self-esteem in my professional career,
I
something
love
that,
that. Yeah.
yeah, something that like being black, being a woman, being neurodivergent in the workplace, or at least the way I was treated and being perceived, like that was taken away from me. And again, I had to go and recreate that for myself because the system wouldn't do that for me. Like we go and we clock in and we clock out, but I want to do work that like gives me joy, that makes me want to dance and put my hands up of like, enthusiasm and excitement. And I feel like the workplace drained that out of me to the point of, physical, mental, psychological exhaustion. But yeah, at least that today I'm happy that I did bring my full self to work. I really did that, but it cost me. And today I continue to bring my full self to work, but on my own terms. Yeah, and I really wish that more people are able to do this without having to, necessarily leave the workplace, because not everyone is going to become an
Exactly.
entrepreneur.
That's what I
Not
was
everyone
just
has
going to
that
say.
desire.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, is an entrepreneur. And it's amazing that you found that in entrepreneurship. And I can definitely co-sign on that.
Mm,
Um, but I feel like the workplace could be that place too for many, many people if they take their culture seriously. And if they, what you said earlier, they address people who are resistant to change, if they, continue and not only, how do you say that? Yeah, if they not only focus on vanity metrics, but actually push through to create real change and listen to the people who are suffering from this and open up the conversation.
yeah. People metrics, human metrics. I'm
Yeah.
very curious to hear as well about your experience. How was it for you?
So I had a pretty similar experience. I am a woman of color, also neurodivergent. So I had a lot of experiences before I was diagnosed where I felt like, oh, this pace of this organization is maybe too slow for me. The structure of it, I could not really land on. So I had a lot of those experiences. I have a background in marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So my work background is in marketing. I started working for a lot of agencies and commercial brands, and then switched to more impact-driven work because I was really passionate about human rights. I started working for NGOs like Doctors Without Borders and Oxfam because I thought, okay, this is where I'm going to make an impact. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to, make the world a better place.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really interesting. I was always really worried about the state of the world and climate change and all these things. And I thought, okay, these organizations are fixing that. But after being there for a while, I thought, okay, it's beautiful work, but we're basically putting bandages on big gaping wounds. And it's a vicious cycle that, all these NGOs are also a part of, even though the work I still support and it's amazing. I just also that neurodivergence in me feels like if I don't really believe that what I'm doing matters or is creating change, then I
Mm-hmm.
can't do it, so
It
that
needs to
was
have a bigger meaning.
exactly, exactly. And during the time I was also working for a lot of, big commercial corporates as well as a freelancer. And I noticed the difference, within the NGO space, people were, I think, a little bit more aware about global politics, about what you can and cannot say. I think most people, not every, but in corporates, there was a lack of awareness. There was a lack of awareness on the state of the world. So, as a person of color, as an immigrant, you feel, I think, global unrest more in your
Mm.
body.
You're more
And
sensitive to it because
exactly,
somehow
yeah.
you're directly or indirectly related to it.
Yeah,
Or
and many times it's people that look like you that are suffering.
mm,
And yeah, and there was not really a place to talk about that. There were many instances where I would speak about, global injustice, and the lunch table would be really quiet.
oh my gosh, I had the same, like the big silence when you're speaking about, like you literally all saw something on TV or in the news and like no one else is as bothered as you and you feel like the weird one when
Yeah,
it's
like
like
exactly. So yeah, that has been my reality for the most part. Fast forward to the work that I'm doing now. I am the founder of Heal Magazine.
hmm
I was always really interested in mental health, and the lack of mental health is the root cause for many of the problems that we see today in this world. Climate change to all the war and all the even world hunger. And I think that if we fix the way in which we relate to each other and the world, then we're on the right path to creating, a more sustainable, safe world for everyone.
hmm So healing
Um,
ourselves to heal the world in a way.
exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's what drove me to start Heal Magazine. And it's been a beautiful journey. I have the privilege of talking to people who are actually doing the work. I talk to healers, to artists, to psychologists, to people who have been through immense trauma. And I have the privilege of speaking to them on such a deep level, something that I've always missed, in my work in corporate life, to talk about the things that actually matter. So, yeah, like you, I gifted myself that through entrepreneurship and creating, a project that actually lets me tap into that side of myself. And it's been, yeah, really rewarding on so many levels.
I love that for us, and I love that you created what you couldn't find outside. You created it with for yourself, and you get inspiration from the people that it brings along. So that's wonderful. And when you think about it in a way, that's why talking about the business case for mental health, like, oh, mental health, if there's more mental health at work, teams are more productive or like they're more innovative, or the same thing you have for diversity, equity, and inclusion. You often hear these business case lens to why we should implement things that are absolutely fundamental to our well-being, to our existence as humans, even within a space that's like business driven. We should be focusing more on the human case, right? The social justice case for change, because we're not just walking statistics, right? But this data explains why this matters so much, and there's a lot of people out there who are in deep strife and suffering while working, especially in corporates. And we need to do something about it, because if you don't have health, like you can't do much. Like health is wealth, and therefore it should be about that, and not just about the numbers and the money and how productive we can be.
Exactly. And, we spend about a third of our lives at work. And that's also something that stood out recently when I reached out to my Heal Magazine community, and I said, I'm basically creating a platform here for you guys to help with healing. So, where is that lacking at this point for you guys? And something really interesting came out of that. A lot of people, not a few, said, that they're doing actually good. They're going to therapy, they're setting boundaries, they're working on their relationships. The people that I have around them are safe for them. They're oftentimes in conscious relationships, but there's a few spaces in which that is not the case. The
Mm-hmm.
first one is with their immediate family, so when they go back home, like parents, siblings, etc. And the other
Yeah.
one is at work. They feel like it's still a place where they have to mask or shrink themselves, or also more importantly, they're dealing with people who are not on the same emotional EQ level.
Mm.
And yeah, I see you nodding. So I think
Yeah.
that's the thing.
I'm
Yeah.
nodding like in shared experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting that, that work is a place where people who are very conscious of themselves and are healing are still feeling like they cannot, they cannot show their healed version of themselves. They're a little bit on guard. So
hmm
that's also what led me to expand a little bit the offering that I do with Heal Magazine.
Mm,
to the workplace, because I thought, okay, there's a lot of learning that we can do
yeah.
in this area.
Yeah. And that says a lot, you know, what you got from your community as well, like, because yeah, I mean, the workplace is not is one of the main spaces where people feel unsafe and unseen. And as you said, like that number makes my head twirl that we spend so much time at work. Therefore, it should be one of the safest places we roam in. And we need to talk about why it's not a safe place for a lot of us, why it's not a place where we can thrive for a lot of us, and why it's a place that causes deteriorating mental health for a lot of us, and what can be done about it.
Yeah, I agree. So let's have a look at some of the numbers that illustrate just how urgent this is and how it connects to the conversations we'll be having in the next episodes of this podcast.
Yeah. So we'll be bringing a few numbers to kind of ground the different themes of our mini series. And the first stat that we'll be looking at concerns leadership and mental health. Nearly 70% of employees say their manager impacts their mental health more than their therapist or doctor, which is on par with their partner. So the workplace, their manager impacts their mental health as much as their partner does, which speaks volume, you know. And this is something so the topic of like mental health and leadership is something we'll be unpacking in our episode with Krimina Yordanova, where we talk about leadership, trauma, and the need for relational awareness at work. So I'm very excited that we will be covering this. And when you think about, you know, poor leadership, which is marked by poor communication, unexpected expectations, lack of empathy, and how this drives, you know, like stress and burnout, low motivation, and disengagement at work. I think over time, it really takes a serious toll on employees' mental health and overall well-being. So we could not talk about mental health without talking about leadership. We have to cover this topic. And I don't know about you, Selma, but I've had really mixed experiences with management. But what I can say for sure is that at least two of the five or so managers I've had in my corporate experience were like, it felt like hell on earth, and it drastically deteriorated my mental health, or even my capacity to stay within that space, to stay within that workplace, to stay employed.
Yeah, was that like a place where that you actually enjoyed and that you enjoyed working at? And was it just the leader that made you leave?
Sometimes it's, yeah, I mean, it's never just a leader, right? So if the leader is a particular way that is not safe, that is not healthy, oftentimes the culture or the most senior leadership allows it. They
Yeah.
feel comfortable enough to do so, because I mean, if you were in a zero tolerance culture, or if they were trained effectively not to be that way, or if there was a form of like accountability mechanisms within the workplace, employees would feel more likely to report these things, or like it would
Yeah.
just not be a thing that would
Yeah, it's
happen,
usually
right?
systemic inside of an organization,
Yeah,
definitely.
literally. So yeah, it is systemic, it is cultural related. And I feel like the more you are vulnerable, the more you are from marginalized groups, and or you're part of the, let's say, minority group within their organization, and that could mean, you know, you're the youngest. It could mean you're a person of color. It could mean you're the only woman in the team. It could mean you're the only foreigner in the team, which we see a lot as well here in the Netherlands, and other places. Yeah, these things can make you more vulnerable to, you know, the cultures where leadership is not the safe haven, when your leaders can literally make or break you.
Yeah, exactly. Did
What
you want
about
to
you? What
share?
what has it been for you?
Oh, okay. I thought you wanted to share like a specific example, or no?
Oh, yeah. To add to that, I remember when in my first role, I remember the manager was notoriously known for bullying staff members, and I remember one time my colleagues were telling me about how, you know, he had kicked one of our colleagues in the butt before, and like that colleague was still there in the team, the manager was still employed, and like no matter how unhappy people were with him, he had been working at the company for such like for close to a decade or more. But then, when you looked at the wider organization, the CEO and things like that, like in retrospect, it was not surprising. But for me, coming into the workplace for the first time, I was like shocked, because you have this expectation of, I finished my studies and I'm going to work, and you expect a workplace to be, you know more mature than school. It's like, or and then you realize, like, no, people kind of bring toxicity to the workplace as well. And sometimes you find it in the most unexpected places. Later on, in my last corporate role, one of the reasons I ended up burning out was because I was, this time, being bullied by my manager, and I was experiencing things like gaslighting, and so more insidious things that it is not always hard to prove. And that was also very much related to like racialized kind of like experiences that I was having within that team, ageism as well within that team again. So yeah, it's not always that's easy
Tangible
to
or
prove,
yeah.
especially when it's toxicity like that. But in other places, like, it would be maybe like workload, or like just being able to push through, or not having a manager that can mentor you or coach you effectively, or even protect you, like be an umbrella for you from the overall culture. But luckily, I've also had like one or two, let's say two managers that gave me hope. But surprisingly, I would say that, you would think that having women as managers, as a woman, would make a difference. But then you realize, like, it really doesn't matter what the gender is. They're all capable of making or breaking you, in fact. It was surprising to see that, even the women replicate some of the toxicity coming from a patriarchal way of
System.
leading. And that was really heartbreaking, actually.
Yeah, I feel that in my bones. I've been in a similar situation where I had a female leader who was horrible. I have been in similar situations where the female leadership was taking over those patriarchal systems, and was a lot of backstabbing involved and stuff like that. And generally just not a very safe environment to operate in. But I think I'm a person sometimes of extremes. So I had a really horrible experience, but I also had like amazing experiences. I had like, I think, two or three managers that have been female leaders. But yeah, the best examples I could have wished for when it comes to leadership. I felt seen by them, supported, guided, and that umbrella that you're talking about, protecting you from the rest of the organization,
Hmm.
checking in with your workload, but also making you feel like you're doing enough, that, your work is valued and validates you, and just seeing you, I think, in general. Uh,
Yeah.
Having that, in my mid-career was a real game changer, because it gave me that confidence in my skill set as a marketer, and
Hmm.
my position within those environments. And just to have that example is really, really valuable. To
Yeah. So you
Yeah,
had some good apples within that basket as well to
I
help you in your
did. Yeah,
career and like your progression, your growth as a professional.
I did. Yeah, and and I realized that it's very lucky to have had that.
Hmm.
That's definitely not the norm, and that's also definitely not every place I worked at.
Yeah.
By
Balance.
far, but they're out there, and that
Yeah.
deserves to be said as well. And I recently have this anecdote that I wanted to share, where within a team there was a leader that had a pretty authoritative, like, leadership style, and
Hmm.
a lot of people felt, yeah, I think the general sentiment was maybe that there was a bit of a fear culture,
Yeah.
afraid to speak up about certain things, afraid to be their full selves. I think generally the topics that we're speaking about now, and that team decided to actually voice that collective experience to said leader.
Hmm.
And what happened was actually beautiful, because it changed. And it sounds
Hmm.
like a fairy tale, but I 100% know that this is true. The leader listened to the feedback. Obviously, it's not easy to hear. The leader then said, this is not a surprise to me. This is feedback that I've heard before, and
Mhm.
I'm going to make it a priority to change it. And
That's wonderful.
drum roll, just fucking did.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like when I speak of self-awareness in the workshops I give for my clients, especially in DEI, one of the things I say that's like what makes a great leader is how self-aware they are. And oftentimes people don't realize that self-awareness is like it's a multi-dimensional matrix. It's a
Mm,
matrix, right? So it's not just how you know yourself, but it's also how you make sense of what people perceive about you and how they communicate that to you. And yeah, truly like in
it's a leadership
self-improvement,
skill in itself to be
right?
able to, yeah, to take it and to change it. And
And that requires emotional intelligence. And yeah, if you're not able to perceive feedback as a gift, you can't grow. You can't become a better manager, right? You can fail
exactly.
and then improve. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's a beautiful example. And also, yeah, it deserves to, be heard. And because we often hear about the very traumatic experiences, and
Mm.
there are plenty. But it's also nice to hear sometimes that, hard work did pay off, or speaking up did pay off, and that's not
Courage.
always the case. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Love that.
So the next stat is about burnout and psychological safety. Burnout is pretty widespread. Half of the workplace feels burnt out, according to the Boston Consulting Group, but it doesn't affect everyone equally. LGBTQ plus individuals, people with disabilities, and frontline workers report the highest level of burnout. And I think we're not really that surprised to hear that.
Oh.
No. And
We're
in our
walking living examples of it.
exactly. In our episode with our guest Nicolette Lazarus, we will explore what happens when we don't feel safe to be ourselves, and the cost of the workplace taboos like, burnout and grief and conflict. We all know someone in our family or friend group that's burnt out. This topic is a very urgent matter, and we should take it more seriously to create safer environments for people to work.
Yeah, most definitely. And when you hear statistics like that, like half of the workplace, what do you mean half of the workplace? That's basically every other person in the workplace.
Yeah.
And I really understand why people speak of like burnout as an epidemic that is truly too widespread, I would say. And it's even more concerning because everyone is like we speak about it so much, and there's still stigma and shame and negative connotation related to those who take the time to take care of themselves, either because they're forced to or they know that it's essential to the continuation of their career and life, and all this resulting from this corporate rat race of productivity and profit and like not disturbing the status quo. And I think, yeah, it's even more concerning that this number has been increasing and not decreasing despite how much we are talking about it. We cannot talk enough about it because it's not changing.
Yeah, we have to continue talking about it because it's half of the people. And at some point, so if this continues, it's going to be 100% in a few years, right?
Yeah, very excited about this episode.
Yes. Nicolette is a force, and she's going to bless us with her power.
Yeah. And the third guest we'll be having in this mini series will be talking about hormones and productivity. And the stats that we want to bring forth is that is from a study that was conducted in Japan, where they found that women in perimenopause are over 2 times more likely to report suicidal ideation. Um, and in our episode with Faten Salem, we'll talk about femtech, menstrual health, and what it means to design work that actually listens to people who menstruates, particularly women. And this stat is highly relevant to workplace well-being and mental health because it reveals how, biological and hormonal changes, especially those experienced by women, intersect with psychological distress in ways, workplace often ignore. I can think of, the gender equity gap, for instance. and how perimenopause, disproportionately affects women at mid-career, or the stages at which they get into leadership. And so without support, they may leave the workplace or suffer in silence, which essentially widens that gender gap in leadership and career progression. So talking about hormones, beyond women of this stage is at this stage of life is important when you think about things like PMS, but not just menopause, like PMS and other hormonal or menstrual related conditions as well that can limit a person's capacity to thrive at work if not supported effectively.
And we need them so desperately in leadership, right? And the gender gap increasing at that age is not only affecting the women, but while researching this episode, I came across some information that said that women who receive hormone treatments during perimenopause are also significantly, their mental health symptoms significantly in decrease.
Yeah, no, and I get it as well. Like what you're saying is so important. Like I'm getting at a stage where like friends around me are looking into IVF or doing research into it, and how you know getting the different shots and whatnot can affect your energy levels, and can affect like how you show up in both social and professional settings. um Luckily there's more and more workplaces that fund your process of
Yeah, I heard that. Like,
IVF, and
yeah.
which also diminishes the financial stress that comes with these things, which is something that we don't talk about enough. It costs a lot of money, then it affects your body in many ways. And yeah, it's yeah, you would think that it's, oh, we're speaking about all these things, it's more for like menopause, but no, it's like even women who are slightly younger, or like other folk who have to deal with yeah menstrual or hormonal kind of like external forces in their bodies, if
Yeah,
you
or
can.
treatments, like, yeah, it can be many different situations where people are going through like a hormonal transition or whatever. And it affects you. But I think if you feel safe enough to be there in the moments where you don't feel 100% okay, then your productivity is also gonna rise.
Yeah, and having
Um,
the safety and the space to be able to be open about it, or at least to say, hey, like I will be going through XYZ process, or I'm currently dealing with this and this and this and that. Therefore, for a time being or for a particular season, I'll be needing a different type of accommodation, or I'll be having different energy levels, or if I'm not able to show up as I did in the past, this is the reason, or like, and not hiding it, and not being disempowered from performing, or from your work being evaluated in a way that is fair and equitable. um
yeah, and exactly. And you should feel safe enough to do that, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love what you mentioned as well, as about like oftentimes when we speak about hormones, people often just talk about the binary men and women. It's like, no, there are other folk amongst us who will be impacted by menstruations, who will be impacted by hormonal imbalances, people who are transitioning, as you said as well. So that's so fundamental in this conversation about mental health, that we include them too.
Definitely, yeah. So these numbers are super heavy, but I think they also offer clarity. I think we all need to do better, and we can do better.
Yeah, indeed. And this brings us to the final part of our episode today. We really want to kind of give you a bit of a broader idea of what you can expect from the mini series and the vision that's driving it. Over the next episodes, you will hear from the change makers, leaders, and community builders we mentioned, Nicolette, Faten, and Kamena, each bringing their lens to their conversation on mental health, identity, and inclusion, with a personal touch as well. So not just from the lens of their expertise, but also what motivates them, what makes them them. So yeah, we're really excited about that.
Yeah, we wanted to, make our contribution to Mental Health Month, which is in May. So you can expect like one episode every week for the month of May. And our vision is really to highlight the people who are already doing the work, and to spark something in those, who are maybe ready to begin. Healing the workplace is for leaders and allies and everyone who's ever felt like they had to leave part of themselves at the office door.
And anyone who has mental health, which means all of us.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, bringing this mini series to life has reinforced the need to speak of mental health in the workplace. And when we got into it, it was just an idea. It was me and Axelle sitting at my office and thinking, okay, what can we do? And when we got into it, we got completely immersed in it. We were researching stats, we were speaking to people, and yeah, just being fully immersed in this topic made us at least made me realize that this topic is so big and we don't speak about it enough.
absolutely.
um and yeah, it really goes beyond the workplace. I think everyone that you maybe mention some of these stats to can relate. And yeah, it's just so much bigger when you start noticing the little signs. You see them all around you.
100%. Every conversation we had me thinking for days about, the topic and how it impacts our lives beyond the workplace. And it was truly, I would say, empowering to share this experience with you, Selma. And I really hope these stories will inspire our listeners too, because change is within reach, but it will require, awareness, reflection, and action as well, systemic action as well, community action, collective action. So yeah, I hope this will create impact and move the ball forward.
Yes, I agree, Axel. It has been an absolute pleasure creating this labor of love project with you. And to our listeners, thank you for being here with us. Let's get into it.
Let's heal the workplace.